Welcome back to Out of Left Field. We have a very special guest on the show today, JP, who's a computer security researcher in the antivirus industry. We're going to be talking about government surveillance, Bill C-51, Bill C-59, and all of the political stuff surrounding that. So, JP, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I understand this is your first podcast.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. So let's just start by talking about basically what you do for your job. You work in the antivirus industry. What do you do exactly?
I build environments in which it is safe to detonate malware, and I build environments to collect metadata generated by malware.
Okay, so you're helping find the new undetected stuff to help people keep their computers safe from hackers and shit.
Yep. And help our analysts add definitions to the product.
So it's all new stuff then, what you're doing, basically.
Well, some of it is new, some of it is old. I mean, there's some threats that are very, very long-lived. They just kind of grow over time. But our goal is to bring them in, detonate them, see what they do, what makes them tick, and do it in a safe and responsible way.
People in the computer security industry have to stay ahead of threats because hackers are making new malware all the time and new samples, and without people like you to actually find those samples, your antivirus doesn't really know what to look for when it scans your machine, you know?
Pretty much, yeah.
Cool. So you're working on the front lines. I mean, we're a politics podcast, and so we want to keep this in the area of...
I don't know. We could get into the technical wonkery of it, I suppose.
I wouldn't be opposed.
I would be kind of opposed to
The
this.
technical wonkery? I'm not sure I agree with that.
Oh, you fucking nerdy geeks with your...
With your computers and your interwebs.
I also know, JP, from knowing you for a while, that both you and I share the wearing of the tinfoil hat.
Oh, yeah.
And so one thing that we did want to talk about during this episode is just the whole government surveillance, Bill C-51, how that works, how that impacts people's lives, how that impacts the political sphere and stuff like that. But most importantly, how it has an effect on just everyday people. So Bill C-51, just to bring everybody up to speed, was a bill that was put through by the previous Harper conservative government, and it was kind of
Overreach.
Well, yeah, but it was called
Overreach is a nice way of putting it, really.
I'm being polite.
It was called, people considered it kind of the Canadian Patriot Act. Is it appropriate to describe it that way, do you think?
Yeah, I think I was correct in overreach. It was like gave sweeping powers, the ability to arrest people without a whole lot of evidence, and to protect the country and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it gave the CSIS the power to, quote unquote, disrupt activities of what the Canadian government considers to be threats to national security or the national interest and whatnot. I'm not sure if this was in C-51 or C-59. It's one of the two, but it actually allows for the intelligence agencies to request to a federal judge, request an exemption from the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
I believe that's C-59. The original one of the major problems with C-51 wasn't just the powers that it gave to CSIS and the RCMP and the government, but also just how ill-defined that all was. There was just sort of this vague advisory panel that would permanently oversee the activities, but what those activities actually were left really hazy. And
secret advisory panel by any chance?
Well, it's not public, it is not on camera. Basically, is how it would have worked. That's still the case for most of these things, anyhow. But yeah, that to me was the really the crappiest part of the whole law, is just that they come up with all these things that they say, well, we need to protect people, and the way to do that is to just give sort of hazy, areas of responsibility to CSIS. Because if we clearly define what CSIS can and can't do because of people's, rights, then obviously organizations will just work around that.
Well, and that was Bill C-59. So just a little bit more history to Bill C-51. When the Harper conservatives tabled this bill to Parliament, The NDP was staunchly opposed to it, and the Liberals said that they were opposed to it, but voted for it anyways.
They were opposed to it in principle, where you say, I don't like this law, but we're going to vote for it because we don't want to. Basically, I think they didn't want to look tough on terror or weak on terrorism. Is the thing, and they were just worried that it would be an embarrassment. And originally, it was because a lot of people, when the law was first put into place, didn't really know or care about it one way or the other. Like, it was just sort of going through Parliament, and nobody watches Parliament on a regular basis, so who cares? And so it polls showed the Liberals that they were right, that a majority of Canadians supported this law, and on the basis of that, they're like, well, we better vote for it because otherwise we'll look weak. Except that within about a month, and then it was in the media, and there were protests and sort of a movement against C-51 sort of arose, it pretty much flipped, and the support that a lot of people were giving to the Liberal Party ended up going to the NDP up until the election about 7 months later.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that's kind of worrisome about this is that time and time again, consistently, the Canadian government, when they're drawing up their lists of who they consider to be threats to national security and the national interest, every fucking time, environmentalists, people that are opposed to pipelines, even like the Idle No More movement of First Nations a few years ago, they're always on that list.
It's everybody. It's the Sierra Club, the Dogwood Society, Council of Canadians. Anyone can end up on this stupid list.
So this is a law that was originally designed to, defend against hardcore terrorism, like strap-on bombs and blow-up stuff, and ultimately is being used against activists for environmental issues and
people with placards and whatnot.
Anybody who's going to raise a fuss.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as being a resource-based economy in Canada, whenever there's a big project that's tabled for being constructed or whatnot, there's always going to be environmentalists and people that are opposed to that. But since Canada's economy is always based on natural resources, the government interprets protests and actions against that as being against the national interest.
Well, because it is. It is. I mean, that's the problem with sort of appealing to the Canadian national interest as a standard, because usually that is how this is defined, right? The government, whether it's conservative or liberal, says we're going to create a law that makes it illegal, or we're going to disrupt any un-Canadian activities or any anti-Canadian interest activities. And who could be against that? You would have to be anti-Canadian to be in favor of anti-Canadian activities by definition.
Yeah, you'd have to be a bunch of natives who are pissed off that all their fish are going to get killed by oil tankers, and that makes them terrorists?
Well,
according to the Canadian government,
it's like a category error. Terrorists are anti-Canadian, protesters are anti-Canadian, therefore protesters are terrorists. That's basically how the logic works.
Yeah,
that's a slippery slope.
Sure is. And I think that Bill C-59, this is a classic example of the conservatives paving the road that the Liberals drive down. So the Liberals say that they're opposed to it, but they vote for it anyways, and then they end up coming up with Bill C-59, which was an attempt to try to modernize, fix the issues that were in place with Bill C-51, and try to provide a little bit more context to try to make it a little bit more clear what the CSIS and the other intelligence agencies are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So, for example, one thing that Bill C-59 added that was exempt or that was not mentioned in Bill C-51 is that it explicitly prevents the intelligence agencies within Canada to torture people, which I say...
C-51, once again, C-51
I have an issue with the fact that you have to put in a clause that says, hey, by the way, waterboarding, not cool.
You know what, in principle, I agree with you, but when it comes to governments, I say, treat them like children and just keep repeating that rule over and over and over again. Don't torture anyone. Don't torture anyone. Don't torture anyone. If anything, that should just be like the preamble of every single law we put into place in this country. Government can't torture people. Whatever the law is, just always remind them of that, because apparently they have a really hard time remembering that that's supposed to be the case.
Well, if you don't tell them every 5 minutes, they start torturing?
Well, maybe. I don't know. They don't have to tell us either.
Yeah, true. So some of the things that was updated about this, I mean, the CSIS and the other intelligence agencies aren't allowed to kill people. They're not allowed to interfere with the judicial process. They're not allowed to, I think they phrased it as affect someone's sexual integrity. So I guess they're not allowed to rape people, which is all. This is all good, and I'm glad that they specified this with providing the sort of like official do's and don'ts lists that C59 allows for or clarifies. It also makes it a lot more clear what the intelligence agencies are allowed to do, which is not necessarily a very flattering list either. So on one hand, they're not allowed to interfere with the judicial process, but on the other hand, are they allowed to impersonate a journalist in order to gain the trust of a particular target that they, JP, I only did like a very brief little bit of research on Bill C-59 a few days ago, and I checked out the Canadian Civil Liberties Association has a good, 10 things you need to know about type of list. What do you know? What are your opinions on Bill C-51, C-59,
or just laws like it and all that?
Laws like it, the attempts by the government to try to surveil and control people and monitor communications.
I've followed some of the news on those laws, and like anyone else, I thought there was an overreach there. They were defining some very, very, very strong powers that they were giving themselves. But if you ask the average person, they'll hear about it on the news, they might talk about it for a couple of days, and after that it goes away. It's not in the public consciousness. It's the same thing when I talk about malware to regular Joe. They're like, yeah, whatever, as long as if there's no pain point, they're not overly concerned. And that's one of the things that worries me about that is that, these laws are going to be passed, they're going to be codified, and then people forget about them until they're directly affected. So they decide, hey, I don't like such and such a thing that's happening. I'm going to go and walk around with a picket and then, either get interrogated or suffer an impact from those laws, and then they're like, well, what do you mean this is legal? They're allowed to do this. It's only when there's a pain point that you'll find the general public will care.
It's true. And I think that government surveillance is the kind of thing that is intentionally kept in the background. They're not going to let you know.
They're not going to talk about it openly until it blows up in their face. Like they had some tracking that was done with wireless networks at airports.
Right.
Some of those news get leaked, and then all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, what the hell? They're allowed to do this?"
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, as it turns out, yes. According to the law, they are allowed to do that.
Exactly.
So
it was just a test to see if they could, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or like when they were, when they had plainclothes police officers in Montreal infiltrating protests in order to either disrupt them or to provide excuses to get people arrested and kettling and stuff like that. As it turns out, they are allowed to do that. The police officer is allowed to pretend to be a protester and be as disruptive as he is told to be, and then the regular police, the not secret police, I guess we would say, is they can then just act as if this is indicative of the protest as a whole. So then we'll just arrest everyone, and that's it. Clear the streets, and everything's fine.
And let global capitalism march on.
Well,
forward.
sure. The whole business, the whole business of business needs to keep happening, and the police have an important, if not, you might even say, vital role to play in that.
As a direct result of the industry that I work in, I was made aware of things that people might not know, and it's always a real eye opener. So I work remote, and I run a lab remote, and part of what I do in my duties is I detonate samples. And at the very beginning of
malware.
Of malware, yes.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of this arrangement, I was like, whatever, I'll just detonate some samples. I'll segregate my network, to be safe. I'll have like a segregated network in which I detonate malware, and then I'll have like my personal stuff on a separate network. And all of a sudden, my ISP's contacting me.
Right.
And threatening to terminate my contract because apparently I'm emanating malware.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? This is really interesting because as far as I knew, your ISP is providing you access to the internet. And that's kind of like, that's what an ISP is.
Yeah.
I didn't know that like my ISP was doing DPI on my traffic and
Oh, so
detecting malware emanating from my cable modem or my ADSL modem and terminating my contract based on that. I'm like, well, wow, that means there's like way more people that are looking at my traffic than I thought.
one thing I talked to Mac about before you arrived was we're probably going to end up using a lot of terms that most people aren't familiar with. So if at any point we have one of those, like DPI, for example,
Or deep packet inspection.
deep packet inspection, what is that?
Yeah.
So it's a method to peer into a traffic stream. And with deep packet inspection, you can do certain things. Like the most known ones are inserting ads
Right.
in the traffic. And because this is done at the ISP level, it's not like you can run an ad blocker
Right.
because they're injecting the traffic into yours. That's one of the ways that I think that they're detecting malicious traffic emanating from my network. And in my case, okay, fine, I know it's bad, but I'm detonating a sample in order to sniff outbound and inbound traffic to figure out what's going on. And I've spoken to a lot of other analysts at my work, and they're like, "What do you mean? Like, we don't run anything special. We just detonate stuff, and that's it." And nobody ever shows up at their doorstep saying we're going to terminate your contract.
Right.
Whereas in Canada, with both the major ISPs, that's a reality.
Rogers and Bell.
So TELUS and Rogers,
Okay.
more so. Bell I
Right.
won't touch with a 10,000-foot pole, but that's us. That's
They are literally Hitler.
I had an issue
come
with them a
on.
long time ago.
The one, I've said this before, the one people hate the most tends to just be the one they've dealt with the most recently.
So I hate both just as equally. I've had bad experiences with both, but that's kind of like that's what you're given. You can either be one or the other, or maybe Bell.
It's as common an experience as bad weather and whatnot in this country.
Exactly.
It's what ties this country together. If anything, that's the real Canadiana that we should all sort of take joy in.
But it was a real eye opener to
Yeah.
find out that that traffic was so heavily inspected. I thought I go on the internet. I mean, if somebody is keenly interested in what I'm doing, they're going to have to contact the ISP, set up like a network tap or flag me or do something. But no,
Like it would have to be specially done.
it would have
whereas-
to be specially done. But apparently it's done for everyone.
Yeah, well, if
And
you,
TELUS is the more egregious out of the two.
if you said that there was a like if it was being used in order to inject advertisements, then I guess the process would just be there all the time anyway. So they wouldn't even need to, like, basically what you're saying is they don't need to do anything special for anyone.
So that actually dovetails nicely into one question I wanted to bring up with you, because internet surveillance and government surveillance and that kind of thing was placed into the public, into the forefront after the Snowden leaks with Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian and the NSA insider that leaked all these documents about all the different kinds of spying that the U.S. and other governments do. And the big focus was, of course, on the United States of America, which it always is, and the NSA and the intelligence agencies there. But what I want to know is, like, how much do you know about, like, how similar is how the Canadian intelligence agencies, like, how similar are we to the United States? Is there any fundamental difference between...
So we're members of the Five Eyes, for one.
The Five Eyes is
It's
New
a coalition.
Zealand,
So
Australia, Britain, Canada, USA, I
Yeah.
think.
New Zealand.
So, but anyone else other than the U.S. is kind of like, the little brother in that deal. It means that there's intelligence sharing across. And that means that when you go on the internet, your expectation of privacy is much reduced. And I'm not quite sure that everyone is aware of that. I know that post-Snowden, there was a chilling effect. And there was some online research done about that, how a number of certain Google queries went dramatically down. Because the expectation was like, if you're going to do a search for Al-Qaeda in your Google browser, tomorrow somebody might be showing up at your front door.
Right, yeah.
So my solution to that was to VPN all my traffic.
Virtual private network.
Virtual
So
private
it just
network.
it just hides the content that you're
Well, what it means is that my content goes to a VPN provider. The VPN provider routes it to another location. Typically, we do that for geolocation evasion.
Okay.
So malware will provide you with a different sample if you're in North America, or if you're in the UK, or if you're in Mexico. If you're in Mexico, it's probably not as affluent. We don't really value that drone, that infected machine. It's not going to give us as much potential, return on investment. If you're in the US, could be rich. Could, if we put some ransomware on that machine, might pay up the ransom, that kind of deal. So we detonate samples, and, we'll detonate a sample, and then we'll route it through a VPN, and it looks like we're coming out of somewhere in the US. We'll do the same thing coming out of the UK, and we'll do the same thing coming out of the Ukraine. And the results are vastly different. You might get a sample that'll give you something really malicious if you're coming out of the US, and then just some malvertising or, click fraud for advertising coming out of the UK, and then just like crap traffic coming out of Mexico.
So would you say that in terms of like deep packet inspection and internet surveillance, is it basically the same in Canada as it is in the US, like insofar as like the governments are concerned? And like,
so in the US it's a lot more known. It's assumed. I mean, we know that AT&T is in bed with like the NSA. We know that Verizon is in bed with the NSA as well. Mm-hmm. It's fairly well documented. Canada, it's not as known. It's Canada. We're all nice. We say sorry all the time.
Yeah.
And it was a real eye opener to find out that like most of the major ISPs in Canada, they inspect that traffic pretty hard.
One thing that I found really interesting about Bill C-59 was that while on the face of it, it seemed to be trying to correct the mistakes of Bill C-51, but it introduces a host of other new problems that weren't present.
Well, it's a Band-Aid that like breaks more things in its process.
Yeah, and I think for me at least, the most interesting part about reading the changes for Bill C-59 was the fact that previous to it, Canadian intelligence agencies were only allowed to use defensive measures, so protecting our own servers.
A reactionary approach.
But Bill C-59 allows for offensive security measures. So one of the things about the Snowden leaks was that the NSA basically stockpiles vulnerabilities in software in order to deploy them in surveillance tactics and whatnot against their targets.
We've seen how effective and how good that is.
Well, they all got leaked by what was that group? I can't remember the name. Shadow something.
Yeah, the Shadow
Brokers.
Yeah, Shadow Brokers.
Yes. And so all those vulnerabilities got leaked anyways. But
that's a personal pet peeve of mine. The whole like nobody but us. We're going to stockpile O-days, and nobody's going to know about this vulnerability in this piece of software or in this switch or
O-day.
in this antivirus.
What's an O-day?
So an O-day is you have a vulnerability in a product that lets you exploit it to make it do something it shouldn't be doing.
All right.
If it is known and there's a patch issued, then it's no longer a 0-day. If it's a 0-day, nobody knows about it.
It's been 0 days since it's been discovered.
So basically. Nobody knows about it. So if I use this 0-day to compromise your computer and read all your files and do all sorts of nasty things, eventually somebody's going to try and figure out what happened to you. And the O-day will no longer be an O-day.
It'll eventually get discovered.
It'll get discovered. So you have some security researchers that'll find these flaws. Right. They'll do responsible disclosure. They'll contact the manufacturer, say, hey, I know how to make your software do horrible things. Please make a fix. The fix comes out, and at that point, it's no longer an O-day.
But if it's never actually been exploited, it's just sitting there. Like you said, they can stockpile these flaws.
Call it a virtual ammunition.
Yeah,
I have a bullet in my gun. It's guaranteed that it's going to hit you, because even if you are the most conscientious patching person and you keep your system up to date, the minute there's an update, you apply it, which a lot of people don't do in network environments. It doesn't matter. If it's an O-day, I can still own you.
The way I like to describe like what a vulnerability is to people is like, say you have a safe that like an old school
Yep.
safe that has a bunch of valuable information inside of it, your credit card details, personal information, whatever. And it's like the most expensive, top of the line safe. But someone figures out that if you just take a toothpick and you just press it against the mechanism like so, it'll just pop right open and you can just open it without knowing the combination lock or whatever.
I don't know how close to the truth this is concerning safes.
No, I've seen some YouTube videos too, actually.
Have you seen the gun safe that simply required lifting and dropping?
Oh, shut
Yeah,
up! Really?
it just dropped it. Yeah,
this was a TSA approved gun safe, and you lift it and drop it,
and the lock just
and the
pops
lock
open?
pops open.
Oh, fuck. And yeah, as it turns out, computers work
Basically the same way.
Basically the same way. Yeah.
So the same way. So you have all these O days, and they're stockpiled by the NSA, by CSIS or CSEC or whatever they want to be called, or some other organization. And the idea is nobody but us. Nobody but us knows this secret. And every single time they've done something like that, there's an independent security researcher who's like going to DEF CON or ShmooCon or something, going like, hey, check this out, lift the safe, drop it, pops open. Or check this out, run this piece of software, force the computer to do this, and bam, you're in.
Yeah.
So there are rules in place, most of the ones that I'm familiar with are out of the US, that say, hey, if you find an O-Day, you can keep it for X amount of time, and then after that, you should really get a hold of the manufacturer and tell them, by the way, your shit is broken.
Well, that gets it sort of like I think the overlapping issue here when it comes to C51 and sort of what you do as for work and just generally what we've been talking about. This idea that, on a technical level, there is a value to saying, we want to make the world a safer place, or we want the internet to be a safer place, or whatever. And yet, the actual ways in which we can make things better, like fix these problems, requires you particularly to be able to see how they work and sort of dissect them and take it apart. And that does mean sort of this weird hazy area in which the government considers it entirely they sort of have a monopoly on knowing about these exploits. And when just some jackass finds one and goes, hey, look at this cool thing, suddenly they all get in a huff about it. And I guess that's sort of the question is, how does this all work together? Because the government's doing its thing, you're doing your thing, everybody else is doing all this stuff. Like, it would seem, in theory, if we're all working towards the same end of a better world, safer and for everybody, and the internet's a nice, wonderful place, that this wouldn't really be a problem, and yet it is.
So there's a couple of things that you can do if you discover an O-Day, for example. You can do responsible disclosure, get a hold of the manufacturer, give them a certain period of time that's predefined, and say, hey, your shit is broken, you've got 30 or 90 days to issue a patch, and after that, I'm going public with it.
Yeah.
So that's one way that it can happen. You can have other people that are interested in, like, the glory, and they're basically going to post immediately and say, I found out how to broke this, here's a proof of concept, and now all of a sudden, we have to deal with bad guys that keep an eye on this, go, hey, somebody's provided me this cool proof of concept, and now I can break into all this stuff. And then, the repercussions, depending on what technology you've attacked, can be huge. And to further muddy the waters, you have some researchers now that are genuinely afraid, because of laws, to talk about what they found. Like, you find a way to break an integral internet technology, and you're like, okay, well, if I talk about this, I could potentially get sued by the company that created that technology.
Sure, and even if I guess even if you tell some of these companies, they might just drag their feet or just threaten you or whatever.
Exactly.
And then what? Even if you're trying to do the right thing here, like, what's the incentive? Even just to be like, I could just say nothing and just let it go, and then I'm
well, no.
not in trouble.
There's another alternative to that. You could go to the black market and sell these vulnerabilities for a significant financial amount. If I find an O-Day for iOS, for an iPhone, that works across the board on every single iPhone that's out there, the conservative value for that is $1 million.
Man, to think about that. Your choice is to go to a company that might threaten you with a lawsuit or sell it.
Maybe get some, like, I guess, reputation. Oh,
yeah.
This guy found that.
Yeah, sure.
Or I can go to some super shady security company that makes, rats to, like...
remote access Trojans.
Remote access Trojans that can be sold to anybody, including some really shady regimes that might go after activists and install those rats. And you want to try and organize a protest. Well, if your phone is owned, you get put away in a jail and made to disappear.
This reminds me of
$1 million.
There was what was that that fucking Italian company hacking? It had a really generic hacking team, and
hacking team.
There was a leak. I guess they were using shitty passwords or something a couple years ago. They got owned, and like a bunch of the data that their inner business dealings was leaked online, and it actually was really revealing. Like the extent to which this kind, like we talk about O-Days and vulnerabilities and surveillance and stuff, but the hacking team leak, I thought, showed more than anything how much it actually has a palpable impact on people's lives, because the hacking team was selling vulnerabilities to the Sri Lankan or Bangladeshi governments, then they were using them to actively...
they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And,
and they were
they're
actually...
not supposed to.
People got fucking killed. People got tortured.
So
people got disappeared because of the vulnerabilities that they sold these shitty... repressive regimes.
That's the end goal, and that's one of the things. Like you talk to a number of these companies, and they'll all tell you, if a repressive regime comes to see us, we won't sell to them.
Oh,
and again and again and time again, there's been leaked invoices, and their typical excuse is, we're selling this information or these programs to a reseller, and the reseller is ignoring, export laws and selling to Iran or some super repressive regime. And the end result is, if you find an O-Day on iOS and you sell it to one of those companies, it's quite possible that, there's blood on your hands.
Yeah.
Somebody will die as a result.
Yeah, and the thing that concerns me, just to call back to what I was saying a little bit earlier before about the change that C59 puts into place, is that it allows Canada to be one of those players on the global scenes that stockpiles vulns, exploits in computers in order to further our own national security interests by
protect the country.
Yeah, and surveil people. But then that just, if you find a vulnerability, you fucking disclose it. You don't keep it as secret and then just hope nobody else finds it. And so it basically renders Canada and the Canadian intelligence agencies as forces against progress in patching these vulnerabilities and exploits, and it makes everybody less safe, and it makes it easy. It might make it easier for them to engage in wiretapping and surveillance and whatever. But then it also renders, it makes it so all these the computers that millions of people use are not getting updated and patched.
Yeah.
And so it makes us more... I think Bill C-59 was an attempt to make Canadian intelligence and surveillance more like the United States and how they operate.
It was presented as a way to fix Bill C-51, and I think it brought in more problems.
Yeah.
And, when you look at these kinds of capabilities, stockpiling O-Days, having the ability to, do offensive hacking... There's no scenario in which this ends well.
Yeah. No shit.
They all say it's all for the greater good or benefit of whatever, but it does. The inevitable result is some horrible, shitty thing that's going to happen at some point. And
they bring in the argument of going dark, for example, which I keep hearing all the time. We're going dark.
What does that mean?
People have cell phones that are automatically encrypted. We have these terrorists that, have valuable information on their phone and we can't access it because it's encrypted. We should veto a backdoor in all the phones to make everyone safer. So that's a favorite argument that I hear all the time. And it just drives me bananas because it's kind of like it's your typical, you need to nerd harder. You're building a phone, it's fully encrypted. You need to nerd harder so that there could be a backdoor so that, if there's a situation that requires it, we can break into the phone and we can get the information.
Yeah.
And this demonstrates such a profound misunderstanding of what encryption is and how it works. It drives me bananas because we can't put a backdoor without inviting everyone else to have a shot at it. And if they mandate it into law, which is hubris, then what happens? Everyone in Canada has a phone that can be backdoored. Then China's going to ask for phones that can be backdoored. And if we're the only ones to go with it, then everyone else is going to go, oh, wow, well, this guy's Canadian. We can just waltz right in.
I've heard this described as having a magic wand that only good guys can use.
Yes.
And how that's just childish and dumb.
It seems like it's like a magic wand that only bad guys will care about enough to stop from working. Every normal jackass will be like, well, I got a cell phone and I don't really care or know or even understand how it's backdoored, and they just do their regular bullshit on their phone and they get screwed over by the government. And the people who are like, actually, I am going to be doing nefarious deeds, they'll be like, and that's why I'm not going to use this technology that is clearly flawed for what I want to do, which is secretive and whatnot. So you just do something, you use something else, or a burner or whatever. Just like that's what actual criminals use. They don't dick around on their home phone talking about crimes that they're planning on doing.
It's the assumption that there would be a way to devise an encryption method. It's hard enough to fucking get a phone to be encrypted and be secure. Now we have to devise it in such a way that there's a key for which only in certain cases legitimate law enforcement has access to and breaks the whole encryption model, but then restores it when we need it.
It reminds me of, it was one of the shootings in the United States. I know I'm not being very specific.
The two Muslim, the guy and his wife, and they asked Apple to... No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So they asked Apple to remove the brute force protection on their iOS or their operating system. And so brute force is basically when you try every single fucking possible password until you get in. And
for which there's a mechanism that only allows you to try so many tries, and then it locks the phone.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted removed.
Yes.
So you know how they defeated that?
How did they defeat that? Because Apple said they wouldn't remove...
No, the FBI went to a third party, and what they did is they copied the contents of the phone onto another phone, and then they would do the 5 tries that they were allowed, and then they would copy it onto another virtual phone and do the 5 tries.
Okay.
And this is the smaller iPhones, anything iPhone 6 and up, that won't work. That particular technique won't work anymore.
Huh.
So they were bitching and crying to Apple because they wanted Apple to design a system that would essentially break their security model, and rightfully so, Tim Cook said, F you.
Well, it would also just be a complete and utter PR disaster for them anyway, to be like, yep, we're going to work with them and just, yep, it's no longer secure. Whatever security we have is terrible anyway, because all the FBI has to do is twist our rubber arm and just say give us the passwords.
And it was proven that the minute that there were 20 people waiting in the wings going this scenario, I believe they acted on because it was so perfect. There
was a shooting.
There was a shooting.
Violent public.
A vaguely legitimate reason to need it now, because who knows?
It was like that show fucking 24. It's the clock's ticking and we need to break the rules.
All the stars were aligned for anyone to say, oh, wow, okay, this is warranted.
And then they set the precedent.
And once the precedent is set, you know that there's 50 lawyers waiting in the wings going like, well, I need this one open and I need that one open and
I need to find someone's lost dog, so can you just break this phone for me kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is online a YouTube video by a guy named CPG Grey that discusses
I've
phone
seen some of his
encryption.
videos. He's good.
And that one is, I wish every time I see C-SPAN videos where there's the rotating FBI guy asking for backdoors, I really wish I could just grab him by the scruff of the neck and say, watch this. Because they do not understand encryption. They don't get it. Oh, nerd harder. There's a way you can do this.
Well, that seems to be so much of how the government considers things. They don't want to have, they don't want to be operating under a set of principles or politics that, inform their actions or what they can and can't do. They just want to say there's some technical solution that some, whiz kid will just figure out and will just sort of bulldoze through people's rights in the meantime.
Yeah, and I think that it really speaks volumes towards the fact that governments and corporations, for that matter, don't like what they can't control. So they're happy to stockpile vulnerabilities and use them in offensive security measures to surveil political dissidents and environmentalists and journalists and whatever. But all of a sudden, when an independent security researcher finds the same vulnerability, all of a sudden they're the bad guy. And the fact that there are so many problems with modern computers and software and their vulnerabilities to being hacked by both governments and Russian hackers and whatever, that it's kind of like a wild west right now, and the government's just trying to maintain some sort of semblance of control and punishing people when they get out of line and find vulnerabilities, while simultaneously
not releasing those
vulnerabilities that they found.
They're valuable for them. This goes back to the nobody but us.
Yeah.
And nobody but us is a fallacy. Nobody but us means nobody but us as far as you know.
Well, yeah, there's how many governments on Earth now, and businesses and just...
Look at the financial incentives as well, too. If I'm a talented programmer and I know how to break into something... not everyone is going to have as strong as a moral fiber to say, well, I know how to break into something, I'm going to contact the company. There's going to be the odd guy who's going to go, hey, you know what? That $1 million looks really good right about
Especially
now.
when to do the right thing has all these negative incentives sort of hovering over it.
I could go to jail.
Yeah, it's like I could do the right thing and ruin my life so that a cell phone vulnerability that someone else will probably discover anyway and fix, so maybe I'll just forget about it. Instead I'm going to do the right thing and get completely screwed over. That's the part that always just boggles my mind, is how often it seems like the people who are actually trying to make, networks and the internet and communication and sort of the infrastructure of free speech, that they're trying to make it work and make it effective and safe and useful for everyone, that these are the kinds of people who get screwed over and attacked by the government more often than the actual people the government says that they're looking for. Once again, it's way easier because these are the people who aren't hiding. It's like the people who are hiding and planning nefarious things are the hard people to get. And so it's a lot easier to go after, to kill the messenger, as it were. That's always easier to do. It's easier to go after the person who points out the vulnerability than the person who exploits it.
Yeah.
I have to say, it is quite refreshing to have a discussion on all of these topics without having someone's eyes glaze over.
You're not the first person to say that.
Yeah, actually, every single guest we've had on the show so far has been like, you know what? It's been great to just speak my mind,
and not have this whole thing.
I know a whole bunch of people in the IT industry, and it's ancillary to what I do, but close enough. And when I start talking about security, they're looking at me like, oh, God. This guy just slows down process.
I get it. Change my fucking passwords. I know. God damn it. I know.
It's security guys are truly the black sheep in the whole computer world. Like
exactly.
Even IT hates security.
So we're hated by everyone.
Why can't everybody?
Everybody else is saying, let's do it faster and more exciting, and you're there going, no, slower and safer and
Exactly.
Hey, so that cool idea for like a network attached toaster that you came up with is actually really shitty.
Yeah, actually, if someone just did this to it, it would be a bomb that would explode in someone's kitchen.
This brings me into the realm of being able to buy non-smart devices.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, I went looking for a TV because I was like, hey, I need a second TV just so I can have it like off the side and run something while I'm working and have like a dashboard or something on it. And it was genuinely hard to find something that wasn't a smart TV.
I've seen people's smart TVs. I read an article about someone had company over to their house and they like let them on their smart TV, and within like 25 minutes they had it infected with fucking ransomware because they clicked on the wrong shit,
Yeah, okay. So ransomware on IoT devices. Holy crap.
Yeah.
When is your TV going to say, hey, you want to watch Netflix? Send me this fraction of a Bitcoin. Otherwise, F you.
Yeah. Or like,
Want to see the last episode of your favorite TV show? You can't until you send me $200.
Or how about, hey, I noticed that you have like $250 worth of groceries in your fridge. Wouldn't want to get locked out of that, would you?
If fridge gets locked, the door, I love it. Oh, literal ransomware where they like, or even like a smart front door, you can't exit your house until you pay them money.
There's a company that was making internet-enabled smart locks.
Yeah. Yes.
In their infinite wisdom, they used like just sequential numbers in manufacturing locks for the addresses.
Fuck.
And this. No, you're laughing, but this is something that happened like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But still happens today. I mean, if I can go on the internet and find out if your door is open or closed, or when was the last time it was opened, or
when you open and close it every day, because then you'll know when you're not there, that kind of thing.
Exactly. I want dumb devices. I do not want an internet-enabled toaster.
What is so wrong with just a deadbolt, right? At the end of the day,
exactly.
No external locks. Just I'm in my home. Lock the door.
I must be old-fashioned. I'm a curmudgeon, or like, old, I guess, because I see all these people that get super excited about these technologies that are web-enabled, and there's an app, and you can find out, if how many times your door has been open, and I'm like, no.
Why?
No.
I just don't. I mean, it. I think the reason it's being promoted is purely because a bunch of companies are thinking their, targeted advertising is just going to carry them through into an infinite tomorrow.
Create a product, create a need.
Yeah, and also just you'll be able to you'll be able to advertise to people on the basis of that. If it's a smart refrigerator, you'll know what food isn't there, and you'll be able to have targeted ads on their computer or cell phone that will tell them, hey, you need cheap eggs here, and companies will pay for that, and that's all. That is like. Ultimately, that is kind of, I would say, the flaw in the foundations of how the internet works is that it is so dependent on advertising that like a lot of the rest of the logic of how all this other stuff works, which in principle, I mean, is neither bad nor good, but because advertising is baked into that foundation, it just infects everything else, and it makes everything else just advertise driven. So that no matter what piece of technology we're talking about, it always comes back to how can this be, a targeted, how can this help targeted ads be more profitable for whatever company we're talking about?
What really worries me about that is the fact that there's so much data being aggregated by someone who buys into that model. And for now, then, okay, it's fine. Maybe you get a targeted ad saying, hey, it looks like you like pierogies, and, You've kept putting pierogies in your smart fridge, and we're going to advertise a competitor brand that has a better price. What could possibly be wrong with that?
I like pierogies.
I know. I love pierogies. If all of a sudden, you're consuming 10 times as much food, if all of these systems are like tied in, they're going to go, well, it looks like there are more people in his house than we knew. And we're looking for 5 people that are on the lam.
Or
this guy's consuming like 5 times more pierogies.
Or just your rental agreement said that it would just be you and a small animal.
Well, that's a lot more realistic.
Yeah, you and a small animal, and it looks like you're eating food for at least 3 people. And so you're without even like looking into it, you could just have your an eviction notice sent to you saying like, will you clear, like the algorithm says it's a 99% probability that you have more people living here, therefore you're out on your ass.
Okay, so that brings up another one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is that, like, with the whole governments wanting to control things they can't control, like with the internet and the whole Internet of Things and that whole clusterfuck. But it seems that China is kind of...
Oh, I love China. China's so awesome. They finally passed that law where they have like a reputation program in place.
Yeah.
And everybody has like a reputation score.
Like the Black Mirror episode.
Oh, God, yes. Like, I love Black Mirror, but, I mean, they're really showing us what's going to happen 10 years down the line, and I'm like, this is so depressing.
They're the real trendsetters, yeah.
1984, Brave New World, they were just very moderate / not imaginative enough. I mean, when you look at what we have today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's just it. I mean, people refer, like, they compare the NSA spying, CISA spying to 1984, but it was like when 1984 was written, they didn't have the technological sophistication to imagine how fucking Orwellian the modern world would actually be.
Well, exactly. Also how just totally on board we would be with a lot of it.
Before we get into the whole, China being a possible future of a model of state surveillance and control, I did want to ask you about what your opinion is on about Facebook listening to people through the app, because there was that. Did you see the cat food video?
It's almost become a meme where people are saying, like, I say something and all of a sudden Facebook is showing me ads.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a cognitive bias or if it's truth. So a cognitive bias would be like, I'm only remembering this because it clicks. It makes sense now. Like, I talked about cat food, and all of a sudden, Facebook is...
2 weeks later, I saw cat food.
No, there was a YouTube video of a guy that, like, they don't own a cat. They've never talked about cat food, and they said cat food around their cell phone, and then 2 days later in their Facebook feed, they got an ad for cat food. And I have a personal example of this also, because listeners to this podcast will know that I frequently say fully automated luxury gay space communism. And several days later,
days after several months of saying that.
No, but a couple days after we recorded one of our episodes, I think the first one where I mentioned fully automated luxury gay space communism, I got an advertisement for luxury gay cruises in the Caribbean.
Now, to be fair, I do think that's targeted advertising, but come on, you live in a bachelor suite in Victoria, you're a particular age, I mean, maybe they're just like, why not?
It just seemed weird is all.
Well,
and like maybe it was a coincidence. And like for the record, I'm heterosexual. I am
for the record. Everything we've been saying in this whole thing is we don't want there to be a record. That's the whole point. You don't be like, for the record, I want Facebook to know that I'm heterosexual. No, we don't want them to know. I don't care. You can think whatever you want. If anything, you should be happy that they got it wrong.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. Yeah. Okay. I mean, even if that was like,
for the record, it's none of your goddamn business. That's what you should be saying.
Yeah, that's true. But no, I mean, I just thought I'd throw it out there. But anyway, so China. China is like a heavily surveilled state. They have the Great Firewall of China. They don't let people access all sorts of websites. Do you think the way that China deals with internet surveillance and locking down access to content, do you think that is a model that the rest of the world is probably going to follow?
So my theory, and this is just a theory, is that we are going to see a greater balkanizing of the internet, where everything is kind of like in a little spot. China's a little spot. And in the U.S., with the FCC basically defanging themselves with the net neutrality laws,
vote,
we're I would say 6 to 9 months away from. For a good example, you can go to, I think it was Portugal for internet access.
I've read about some of this.
You've seen that where they have like the package if you want Twitter and if you want Facebook.
And if you want
then you have
YouTube.
another package where if you want Twitter, Facebook,
and every
YouTube.
additional package is like $5 more
exactly.
a month or something.
So
it's like cable.
I think cable,
basically.
Cableizing the internet,
Yeah,
which
that's
is
what they want.
awful.
That's what the
Because they make more money, right? That's the whole point.
Well, that's the whole point. I think we're going to see a lot of that take place, and my theory, I'm hoping for theory, is that we're going to see an explosion in mesh networking for people to bypass that.
So what is mesh networking then?
One computer that talks to another computer that talks to a cell phone that talks to another cell phone, instead of all of them talking to a central access point like your ISP.
So I understand that is in theory like what the internet is. It's just sort of interconnected computers.
Yes, but rather than relying on your ISP for access, your phone would be talking to my phone directly.
Okay, so it's sort of like a sub-network.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of mesh networks that are deployed typically after disasters. So
I see, yeah. All right.
You'll roll out a mesh network so that you can text someone else somewhere else.
Because you don't want to go through the
infrastructure is down.
Just,
so I think there's going to be probably an explosion in mesh networking.
Is mesh networking the same, like when I read about the community-owned internet service providers, is that the same kind of thing?
It's the same deal.
Yeah, because I know communities in the United States have made their own networks because all they have is to choose between a turd sandwich and
they choose between Comcast and nothing because you happen to live in one of those
cities. Comcast has
cities.
decided that they're not going to deploy any infrastructure because there's no financial viability return for them, even though they got subsidies, which they gladly took, but they're not going to deploy anyways.
JP, what do you think can save the internet as we know it?
Wow, that's a tall question. I really think that we're going to reach a super level of awfulness, and Canada may actually follow in the U.S.'s footstep post net neutrality repeal, at which point the ISPs are making maximum dollars. You're paying for a package where you get YouTube, or paying for a package where you get Facebook, and that will probably drive mesh networking as a platform that's viable.
So you think mesh networking is the way forward then?
It has to be a decentralized internet that can't be controlled by an ISP. I mean, if the ISPs have gotten into their minds that they're not just going to provide you with a pipe with access, and that now they're going to moderate the pipe and they're going to speed it up and slow it down and do all these things, then I think that people are going to find some alternate way. And people always find some alternate way. If you made digital content reasonably priced and easy to access, people wouldn't pirate. But you have such huge barriers. If you want to go and watch like Game of Thrones or something, you have to go get HBO, or you have to go do this or that, and it's super expensive. Well, no wonder there's piracy around that. People are like, okay, this isn't reasonable. I'm going to find some other way to get my content.
I just want to watch this one TV show.
Yeah. And these guys are going to charge me through the nose.
I don't want to spend $120 a month
care
for the premium
especially with Netflix
package
Canada versus Netflix the States, that whole business where it was just like clearly arbitrary and clearly just driven by convenience on the part of Netflix, where they just like, well, actually, you don't get to have this program that we already have available that we could just send out. I mean, the actual costs have essentially already been paid for, and they're just pissy about, copyright or just different like truncated zones of regional control of who, which parts of the world get to watch this particular TV show at a particular time.
Even if people are using mesh networking, though, if they're all still accessing the same, Facebook, Google, all the big players, is it fundamentally different, though? I personally think that the internet is a reflection of the world around it. And, the world that we have right now is controlled by corporations and big companies. At the end of the day, unless that fundamental problem isn't addressed, I would think that the trajectory is still kind of in the same direction. In addition to having the ISPs, the actual internet infrastructure kind of collectivized, I think it would be better if the websites that we're accessing too are also the same way. There's this project that I was interested in a little while ago called Friendica, and it's basically like an open source social network where everybody, you can set up your own little server and have your own social network, and it links with other social networks in the same area and so on.
And you control your information.
You control your own information. It's not like the Canadian government can just go to Facebook and be like, hey, can I have his private chat logs for the last 6 months? Cool, thanks. I'll just look over those. But if the actual social network you're using is also itself decentralized, I think that would be way better.
I totally agree. I'm really hoping that Facebook craters in the near future. I think that would be awesome.
It probably won't.
Well,
it won't.
I mean, so much of the internet is based on the sand of advertising dollars, and a lot of that stuff depends on companies that just have nothing better to spend their money on. That they just look around and they go, well, we have too many cars, so we're just going to spend X number of millions of dollars on just advertising. And internet ads are cheaper, sort of, so we'll just pour our money into that. I think a lot of the internet, and particularly when it comes to sort of the big ones like Facebook and Google, so much of it depends on ads. And I do think that there is sort of a kind of a shell game that's going on there, wherein it's unclear if people are actually, the companies that are giving Google their money are actually getting out more on average than they would just get from some other means.
Oh, well, there's a whole bunch of money that is going to fake clicks or click fraud or
stuff like that.
Fake eyeball views or all that kind of stuff. And so the online advertising market is one that we were particularly interested in, because you have a company that says, hey, I want to sell cars. So they go to something like Google and say, here's X amount of dollars. That gets resold to another advertiser, and it goes down the line until the original purchaser of these ads has no idea who's pushing them. And it's gone through 3 or 4 ad networks, and the 5th one is shady as fuck, for lack of another word. And all they're doing is they've got a bunch of bots that are performing click fraud. There's a lot of fraud in advertising.
I would be interested in any information on how much of the advertisements, how much of those eyeballs are just a total sham. Because I've not seen any. Because it doesn't seem like there's any
conservative estimates would say as much as 50%.
Yeah,
so 50% of your ad network budget goes to fraud.
That is the foundation on which sort of the modern internet is sort of been built around, is advertising.
Well, because there's an ability to track and an ability to build profiles on your potential advertising recipients, it's really attractive. Because if you come and see me and you say, well, I sell golf clubs. Yep. That's what I sell. So I need to target my ads to 45 to 60-year-olds that are not retired yet, but close to retirement.
Live within 10 kilometers of a golf course.
Will live within 10 kilometers of a golf course, have past history, I don't know, they bought golf clubs online at one point in time. Yeah. You can target it so that your advertisement shows up very, very precisely. And that is so attractive from an advertising point of view that they're willing to take the possibility that 50% of their advertising dollars are going to go to shit.
Well, sure. Instead of just putting it in a newspaper and going we'll get 30,000 people to read it, but A, none of them will look at it, and B, most of them will just be like, I don't need golf clubs because I don't care about golfing.
So we've talked about a lot of the really shitty things about the modern internet and advertising and surveillance and so on and so on. But there's one historical example that I think serves as a possible alternative, something that we can look to as a shining beacon of hope and inspiration, and that is Salvador Allende's CyberSyn network in Chile in the 1970s. Mac, tell us a little bit about CyberSyn.
No, this is super interesting. What?
You've never heard of it?
In the 70s?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So Salvador Allende.
I'm gonna give the briefest of descriptions of this because it's actually kind of complicated. Salvador Allende, as a good socialist, was trying to look towards the future and was saying, "Hey, computers are actually a really good thing for planning the economy and planning out all kinds of other stuff. What if we were to provide like a network accessibility and logistics analysis to every single factory, every single industry, every single farm in the whole country? And on the basis of that, we could create an incredibly efficient economy that would be able to dynamically interact with itself on like a fairly autonomous, decentralized kind of way." And ultimately, for reasons that don't really matter for just explaining CyberSyn, but basically there was a bosses strike in the transportation industry that it spread throughout the whole country. So almost all the trucks that were transporting goods throughout the country were shut down. They were all just taken off the roads. And CyberSyn was used to create an incredibly efficient, like just-in-time system for providing resources to the whole country, food here, metals there. And the whole thing was just based around what to us would seem an incredibly crude and fairly archaic sort of network of just like terminals and computers and printout screens. And yet that to me is really the what this kind of technology can actually do. And it worked. And it actually did work in the case of that crisis. And CyberSyn, while it's this archaic bit of history now, I think it does point to a kind of an idea or a principle that like the internet looks like shit right now because it's just full of advertisements and malware and garbage. But you could actually like it's
yeah, and lots of
advertisement, malware, garbage, porn.
Yeah, but
and then 1% valuable content.
But those valuable things, in theory, are actually really valuable.
That's what makes the internet useful.
We could know every single thing about every single thing happening on this planet right now. It could be accessible to us, to every single person on Earth. And that sort of information, the real sort of metadata that I actually care about, is sort of this idea of just the economy, the way everything would work. You could just go online and find the kind of information that all of these individual companies don't really want you to know because it's inconvenient for them. But you could just go online and be like, hey, what is the cheapest car in my area? What is the product? I could just look it up, to buy anything. What's the cheapest loaf of bread within 2 kilometers? That is something the internet is perfectly capable of. And in theory, all that information is already available. But because of the way our economy works and the way sort of society is structured, we don't have the right to have that knowledge. We got to fucking hoof it to every single grocery store and write that information down, right? And nobody wants to do that, so you just go and you pay whatever fucking price it is. Getting manipulated the whole way.
So basically, capitalism itself is the sort of wet blanket on the capabilities of what the internet could be.
I think a decentralized system is definitely a better way of doing things, whether it's a mesh or whether it's some sort of CyberSyn-ish thing or
I'm going
whatever.
to have to look into CyberSyn.
Oh, dude,
that looks
Wikipedia
fascinating.
that. Oh, yeah, it was really
the
cool.
Wikipedia
Especially
page.
when now you're telling me that this is taking place in the 70s.
In the 70s, yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing. I mean, even just the photographs of like the central server rooms are like these like Star Trek era, like Art Deco futuristic.
Like these reel-to-reel things.
Yeah. People talk. You go into our battle stations and fuck those guys. No, this is a real fucking battle station. Okay. No.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Out of Left Field. We'll see you next time. Please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, and if you want to buy us a beer, we are on Patreon, and you can follow us on Twitter @RealUlf. And we just set up a subreddit on reddit.com, reddit.com/r/Ulf.
It's a little website that's, I think is going to go
How's
places.
Ulf spelled?
OOLF.
Out of left field.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so if you want to join us on some discussions there, then mosey on down, and we will see you next time. Fully automated luxury gate space communism!
You're just trying to get a cheap cruise out of this, aren't you? You'd be like, you know what? Fuck it. I think what's going to happen is Vegas going to be like, looking at this 60% off gay cruise to Alaska, all expenses paid, free buffet all the way, free booze. You'd be like, fuck it. You know what? I'll just for a free meal for 2 weeks.